Hello and welcome to my gaming experience. I'm Sword Rush, and I'd like to show you Doki Doki Literature Club. While a lot of the games that I've played so far have been older games, this is a very new game that's on Steam. It's free. At first glance, I classified it as a dating sim game, but visual novel may be possibly more descriptive for it. But dating sim games and visual novel games aren't really something I play as a general rule, just because I really like bullet hell games and first person shooter games, and I go after those a whole lot. But this isn't like a hard and fast rule. I do play other games. It's not like those are the only games I play. I mean, the now classic Myst and Riven games. I mean, those are classic examples of puzzle games, and I really like those as well. And I really like all different kinds of games. But let me explain to you what the general structure for a dating sim game is. In general, the player is introduced to a number of dateable characters, and they get to choose which ones of those they like, right? So each of them portray in a kind of loosely speaking, they portray a specific personality type. And Doki Doki includes like a really cheerful, personable character called Sayori, and then there's the brooding and silent Yuri, a snide and a spitfire kind of Natsuki, and then there's also the possibility of a perfectionist, and she's called Monica. And the goal is always to court one of these characters, and using the game mechanics, typically some kind of little mini game, you create a romantic relationship with them. And the conclusion of the game occurs when you succeed in doing so, obviously. So for each dating sim game, the mini game aspect is a little different. They're not meant to be too complicated, but for example, there's a dating sim game called Honey Pop, and Honey Pop's little mini game is something. It's like exactly like Candy Crush if you've ever played that. But in Doki Doki Literature Club, the players for their mini game must simulate writing a poem by picking out words from a given list. And I know that sounds like really weird, but basically each word that you pick strikes a chord with a particular character in the game. So your goal is to try to pick words associated with the character you want to date. And while that sounds all silly and everything, and it's very simplistic, there's not really any action to it. I mean, you can't you can't really fail. You have to pick words. So you're always going to be picking ones that one of the characters likes. But the thing that I like about it a lot is that this whole poetry aspect to the game. So each at the beginning of each day, so to speak, in the game, your characters all exchange the poems that you wrote last night, and so you give them yours, and they give you theirs. So you get to read these poems that they've written, and each of them are they're very unique, and they're not necessarily super well written, but there's something special about this part of the game in that these poems are supposed to be an expression of their character. And while I don't necessarily mean to say that you should be able to identify an entire person's character just based on one sheet of paper, like people are much more complex than that, but you can tell that a lot of time and thought was put into these poems, more than typical for a game. There's a lot of little details into them to make them all not just look different on the screen, physically different on the screen, but that each of them, you can tell that there's differences between each of the writings, and they feel unique. And that can be a really hard thing to do. I mean, when you have to put yourself into the mind of somebody else, and that aspect of the game I actually really like, because I really like poetry. But in any case, in addition to this, there are a few opportunities to make choices for what you want your character to do, like walking home with, like you get the choice of, walking home with one character versus another character. So there's not very many of them, at least as far as I've gotten so far. There's not very many of them. But why Doki Doki Literature Club? If I never play this style of game, why now? And that's because Doki Doki Literature Club isn't a dating sim game. Not exactly. It's a visual novel. And the game is built to be cleverly disarming, at least at first, with its visuals and the music and the layout. I mean, dating sim games are meant to look cheerful and innocent, and that's what this game looks like. Everything about it, through the entire game, looks innocent, and yet it's very dark. It's very disturbing. There are clues and hints throughout the whole thing, in the background, and behind their eyes lies the sinister mystery that's drawing you in closer and closer until you're left staring straight into the only logical conclusion. And it's a scary one. It's not a happy one. It's frightening and it's disturbing. And this game is not a dating sim game. This game is filled with psychological horror. And that is very, very interesting to me. So let me leave you with this, a small poem written by me. What silence lay in wait for me, what darkness torn to torrid sleep. I sleep the sleep the dreamers keep, as wide awake as fast asleep, and aimless with my silence keep this screaming, feeling, voiceless, weak, until my soul unbroken weep, and to my knees I slowly creep, to weep and weep and weep the weep, a broken soul in screeching creak, the noise so faint as crypt and keep, until the soul within me speak, dissolve into this world we sleep, and give into the saddest peak, now break to steal away me deep the peace, the softest meek, a dream of liberating sleep, the kind of deep I need to keep behind the doors and solace seek, no more alive, no more asleep.